Our speaker for this hour is Nathan Franson. He currently serves as the preacher for the Mariposa Avenue Church of Christ in Citrus Heights, California. He is a graduate of the Memphis School of Preaching, graduated in 2009. Nathan grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and spent his first 20 years in the LDS Church before studying his way out of it. He's taught much about the errors of the Mormon faith and has authored a book entitled Breaking the Chains, an autobiography of why he left the Mormon Church. Nathan also conducts a Bible seminar, What to Know When Talking to a Mormon. He also manages the Mormon Study Media, and this is an important website to remember. It's mormonstudy.net, www.mormonstudy.net, and he has 2 DVDs available. You know, members of the LDS Church are some of the easiest Bible studies to get because they'll come to you. Now, conducting them is a little bit more difficult. His resources are invaluable in knowing how to talk to them, how to teach them the truth, and maybe the best approach. And so, highly encourage all of these things. He has spoken at gospel meetings, lectureships, and appeared on various television programs. He has written numerous articles as well as a tract. He currently serves as the online instructor for the Bear Valley Bible Institute in New Zealand and is a former instructor of the Florida School of Preaching. He has done mission work in New Zealand, South Africa, and Russia. And one of the interesting things about Nathan, I think this is probably our only speaker we can say this about, prior to preaching, he lived in Los Angeles, California, where he worked as a special makeup effects artist for film and television and stage. It's interesting, isn't it? He has worked on some interesting productions, in his time in doing that. He's an interesting man, a good man, has a great wife in Katie and a wonderful son, Micah, and he's a good friend, and we just appreciate the work that he does, and we're looking forward to hearing him speak on the topic, purity and being free from worry. Nathan, come speak to us.
Thank you, Mark. That was, I love Mark. He does such great work, and I'm glad he's here. And I found out he was going to be introducing me, and I'm doing something on not worrying, and I think I'm already coming in behind the 8 ball if Mark's introducing me, so. So I appreciate that, man. To just kind of keep it. No, Mark does a lot of work with New Zealand as well, and so we know a lot of the same people over there, and it's a great work. I am glad that my family's able to be here this year. They weren't. My wife and son was not able to make it last year, and so all I heard last year was, "Where's Katie? Where's Micah?" And I'm thinking, my name's Nathan. It's nice to meet you. So I'm glad they're here, and we have a young man named Will Rourke who came with us from Mariposa Avenue. We're glad he's able to make it this trip as well. But the topic is, purity and being free from worry. We worry about some really, for lack of a better term, some stupid things. When you start to think about it, things that we really probably have no merit in worrying. One of my classmates, I remember. He became a really close friend of mine, Larry Fife, and I know Larry's watching this, so he's going to enjoy this, but I did a mission trip a couple of years ago, probably about 6-7 years ago, I guess, to Russia. And Larry and I went, and we're going up there, and he had been up there before. This was my first mission trip out of the United States. And so about a month, I guess, before we were to leave, he informed me that the government has control over the power and the heating and and so forth up there, and he said it's probably not going to be turned on, so it's you're going to be taking cold showers for a while. And I said, oh no, and I had no idea. And I'm thinking, when I thought about Russia, and I know they've been long removed from it, but my mind goes all the way back to the communist days and how the government controls everything and everyone's living in poverty. Of course, that's not the case now, but so I started to prepare myself. I started taking, little cooler showers and then cooler showers, and by the time, we're supposed to leave, I'm showering in my house in freezing cold water because I wanted to make sure that I got used to it because I didn't want to just go into that. And we were on the airplane, and I said, all right, I think I'm ready for this, for these showers. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, Well, you told me a while ago that the government has control over everything and that we're going to be taking cold showers. And he said, you believe that? You got to understand, if you know Larry's twice my size, but I could have taken him down that day easy. But we worry about things that we really have no reason to worry about. But when you think about a topic like this is, it really is a tough one. It's a personal topic because it's something that I think all of us have been guilty at as Christians. It's something that the world is guilty of, being non-Christians and worrying about things that really, it doesn't have a lot of water. I heard a saying once that worry is a conversation that you have with yourself about things you cannot change. And isn't that the truth? If you look over at Matthew chapter 6, actually turn to Matthew chapter 4 first. I want to set this up. Matthew chapter 6 is the text that they gave me, and looking at this Sermon on the Mount, this is a part of the sermon that Christ is, of course, speaking to his disciples, but how relevant it was to them. These were people that had not been following Christ around very long. And in fact, if you look at the end of chapter 4, beginning in verse 23, Matthew records, Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness, all kinds of disease among the people. And this was big for them because this is where he starts to gain all of these disciples. They started seeing what the Christ was capable of doing. And they saw that, just how powerful he was and how loving he was and how compassionate he was. And they start seeing all of these different things that he's able to do. And it says, then his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics and paralytics, and he healed them. And great multitudes followed him from Galilee and from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. So here this sets up this sermon that Jesus is about to preach. This is right after he had been tempted of Satan, and he overcame that for obvious reasons. But if you can imagine all of these different disciples who are completely drawn to him and seeing what he was able to do and seeing his personality, I always wonder about the personality of Jesus. What was he like? What did he sound like when he preached? And what were his mannerisms and so forth? And we see all the, a great deal of this in the writings. But what better person could they have to lead them up on this mountain and preach the sermon of all sermons to them? To sit at his feet, and just the encouragement that they were able to gain from watching Jesus and listening to him. And during the course of this sermon, and this is where we come to chapter 6, what better person was there to teach them about not worrying? They had a lot of things to worry about back then. Jesus could have had a lot of things to worry about because of the way he was treated by so many, but he leads them up onto this mountain. And he tells them in chapter 6, beginning in verse 25 right here, therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? And look at the birds in the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And are you not of more value than they are? The kind of worry that he's talking about right here is the worry that they cannot control. No one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. We have things on our lists, and we know what our agenda is for the whole week. We have our itineraries of what we're going to be doing. But we really don't know what is going to happen. We know what we'd like to do. We know what we plan on doing. But none of us know if that is ever going to come to fruition. And here Jesus is telling them, you do not worry about tomorrow, about what things you have and so forth. And so, these are all of these things right here are what's out of their control with this. But as I read this, and I received this several months ago with this topic, and really trying to look at different ways. Something happened that really had a profound impact on me. Many of you probably are familiar with the Paradise Fires that happened a couple of months ago. And I started looking at this when Jesus tells him, don't worry about the clothes you wear. Don't worry about the food that you eat. Don't worry about, then he has his list. But then I thought, what happens if you really do lose all of these things? What then? This, when I looked at paradise, and it happened, paradise where we live is about an hour, just about an hour and a half away from us. When these fires hit, it was unreal. Where we were, we got a lot of the smoke down where we were in our area. The fire departments were handing out masks, free masks, so that when you walk outside, you could breathe. You could smell it every day. And some days it just got so bad, they told you to stay inside, do not go outside. And there were restrictions and so forth. So I could only imagine what was taking place up in paradise. It is a gorgeous area if you've ever been up there. A lot of wooded areas, and a lot of people retire up there. And so imagine this entire town that has been there for years being burned down in the matter of hours. But paradise was the first time, it was probably the closest that I had ever realized or come to realizing the devastation that Job faced. We really don't think about that. We read about Job a lot, and just what, he lost his family, and he lost his home, and he lost his livestock and his livelihood and everything that was, that was relevant in his life. But I had never seen up close what it was really like, what he must have gone through. And when we started looking at the pictures that were coming out of paradise, it was a sobering display. Mariposa Avenue, we were fortunate enough to go up about twice a week after everything, and we were working with the Chico congregation up there, and they were doing a great work and handing out supplies and getting everybody, to kind of maintain or bring back, I guess, a sense of normalcy, trying to give, supplies out to those who needed it. My job when I was up there was interviewer. And what would happen, the process was interesting, and they had this down like a well-oiled machine. People would come in and they would sign in to a table and give their ID to make sure that they were, in fact, residents of that area. And then they would come in and get interviewed, and I would be the interviewer. And I would talk to them a little bit, pray if they would like to do that, and from there, and see what they needed. And we had a checklist of all the supplies that they needed, and then I would walk them back into the supply room, and they would they would just mount up everything that they needed that they had lost that they could use at that time. Of course, when you're going from a house to either a small apartment or a trailer or whatever the case is, you are very limited in the supplies that you're able to receive. But nonetheless, it was an experience. I interviewed over 200 victims in this fire by myself. I know there are other interviewers that were doing that as well during the week. I came up about once a week, twice a week. I would sit with mothers. I would sit with fathers and children who just broke down. People that were at the end of their rope, that just, they couldn't believe just everything that had happened. They certainly it wasn't anything that they could expect. I prayed with them, listened to them give their account of evacuating, losing everything, and then revisiting their property when they were allowed to go back on to where their houses were. And some had hope. They were hoping that that they would be able to rebuild. Some lost all of their hope. They didn't know what they were going to do. Just to give you an idea of the devastation of this fire, the fire itself burned fast and furious. I think the timing, they said, was about 8 football fields per minute is how fast this was going. The wind was blowing. They could not get the chemicals that they needed fast enough onto many of these places. There was a lot of emotion. There was a lot of stress, as you can imagine. A lot of panic from people trying to get out of there. A lot of people lost pets. In fact, I remember talking to one person who's, he had to leave his dog behind and ended up finding him about 5 miles away with burnt paws, and that was, one of the fortunate ones. A lot of people lost their pets that they have had for a long time. The children were stressed. Imagine being a child halfway through the school year and you're forced to, pick up, your school has just burnt down, and you have to be relocated and readjust to a completely new environment, all new friends and new teachers and new ways of doing things, and on top of, everything that that they have seen going on for the last little while. And there was a recurring theme that was going on there. I remember the biggest thing that people talk about, not about, all the big stuff, and of course, some of them lost cars and all of their appliances and everything, but it was the small things that really hit them hard. They would go and, just reach for something when, if they were relocated in a hotel or whatever, they would go to just, reach for something like a spatula or just something small, and they would realize, I don't have it. It was lost. We take things for granted sometimes, so much, and they're always the little things. But it was causing so much stress. Some were living out of their cars for 2 months, living out of hotels. The Walmart in the area, they were very nice. They allowed people to pitch tents. And so when we drove past Walmart to get up there, you would just see, it was like a community of tents from people that were just trying to find some place to live temporarily until they could find something more permanent. Most jewelry was so hot with these fires that they just melted together. They would find some of their jewelry, but it was just, the earrings or family heirlooms or whatever the case may be, were just, they said they would find them in balls of metal because it was so hot. Photos were now ash. There's nothing left of those. I remember talking to one lady that was out of town with her sister. Her sister was on life support. She went to New Mexico to be with her. The fires hit. She came back, and the day that I interviewed her was the day that she got back into town. She hadn't even seen her house. She was actually getting ready to see her house right after the interview. Her sister had passed away on life support, and this is what she has to come home to. There's absolutely nothing. She broke down, and we prayed together. And sometimes that's all you could do to really kind of soften the whole situation. There was a man and a wife that came in, Ken and Jennifer, and I've stayed in touch with them to some extent. Ken and Jennifer had an amazing account. As they were rushing around trying to find everything and get everything together, they lived in a community with a lot of senior citizens. And I remember them saying that they would go house to house trying to get these seniors out of their home and into a safer place. They ended up rescuing about 8 seniors, which was great. You hear stories like that of just humanity really taking effect and helping other people. But they told me about one neighbor and friend that they had known for about 20 years. Now keep in mind, the flames were all around them. It blew the doors off of their home. They were just, everything happened in a matter of just a few minutes here. And so they got some of these seniors out. One friend, though, they said that they've known for 20 years, started following them out. They accidentally took a wrong turn into the smoke and lost their lives. Their house caught fire. When they left, Ken's truck ended up catching fire. He talked about a sheriff being behind him with the lights flashing, wanting him to pull over, and it's because his truck was on fire. But they're so focused on getting there to where they needed that he just kept not stopping. He pulled over once, they got the fire out. He started again, it caught fire again. That's how close the flames were. It's just things were flying, the debris, just embers and so forth. Sheriff finally stopped him, gave him a fire extinguisher, and they, along with about 30 other people, followed the sheriff into a clearing that was surrounded by fire. Well, the sheriff calls CAL FIRE, and CAL FIRE assures them, look, we're on our way, we know you're there. Everything was surrounded by flames, and so here's this lone officer with about 30 different people trying to get out of this small community. And he tells them, he says, okay, here's what's going to happen. You need to get in your car. The CAL FIRE is going to come, the plane's going to come, and when they fly over, they're going to drop the chemical. You need to be inside your cars when this happens. So everyone's, waiting on pins and needles for them to arrive. They never came. Help never came. Well, the sheriff saw a meadow on fire, told everyone that, as it burns, it would kind of clear away, certain portions of it. And he says, as soon as it clears away, we're going that way. And he pointed to, to an area that they were able to get out. Well, it happened, and he was able to lead 30 people out of this small clearing. They get to the fairgrounds, and that's where everybody was kind of meeting up and so forth. And I remember Ken telling me his shirt was burnt. They get to the fairgrounds. Everyone's trying to check in and meet and so forth. And there's a kiosk that's being set up from two men. He didn't know who they were, and they had hoodies and clothes and all sorts of things. And you think, wow, this is great. They're going to have, they're going to help us here. Ken said, he went up there and talked to the one who was kind of setting it up. There's two of them, and they said, well, we're not ready yet. We're still setting up, and he said, okay, that's fine. He says, one of the guys was kind of looking at him kind of funny. And he said, what's going on? And the guy said, well, you do realize that we're selling these. The hoodies are $40, the t-shirt. They're selling the people who are affected by the fire clothes to try to get back on their feet. Each person had a different life, different backgrounds, but they all had one thing in common. And they went from having everything to having absolutely nothing in the matter of hours. And it really puts it into perspective when you start thinking about things like that. And especially when you deal with a topic like this of not worrying. How do you not worry when you lose absolutely everything that you have, or in danger of losing everything? The worst part about it was, as I talked to every person, seeing those who did not have a relationship with Christ trying to cope with something so heavy and so profound, and it's something they will never forget, and neither will the children. There will be affliction, and it's going to happen to Christians. And it is going to happen when we do not even expect it. I think it's something James said, and it's just, when I think of this, and you get angry sometimes, I guess, when you read the scriptures and you think, how is this, how am I going to get through it? And I read something that is supposed to be relevant to, to the way that we're feeling or what we're going through, and you think, what do they mean by this? In James chapter 1 and verse 2, he writes, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse trials, or these various trials, different things that will happen to us. And I realize that sometimes it's about evangelism and not getting people. There are things in our life that are going to be in the way, that are going to happen to us, and they're going to be so big and monumental to us that we're going to wonder, how in the world do I ever count it joy going through something like this? And you notice what he says right here. He says, when trials happen, not if, but when these trials happen. Trials don't come with a warning. And James says these are, things are going to happen to you, and they're going to be big. How do I count it all joy when something like this happens? How do I not be disappointed or discouraged? How do I keep from worrying when things happen to me like this? And I think of, my life and what I worry about, and then I think about these people that have just lost everything, and they're just trying to rebuild. Paradise will never be the same. So many people said, we're not going to move back there. We know what the situation is. I want to keep my family safe. Hopefully they can rebuild to some extent, but just, it's unreal when you start thinking about this. And we have so many things that do affect us. How do I count it joy when I have brethren tearing each other down? How do I count it all joy when I have someone that's, that wants to see me fail? When I feel sorrow, when I feel loss, when I feel stress, when I feel physical duress, when I suffer, how do I count it joy? How do I not worry about things like this? And you think of the one who absolutely loves every moment of us going through something like this. Our greatest cheerleader of fail is Satan. But our greatest motivator to counter that is Christ. Paul said in his letter to Philippi, chapter 4 and verse 6, he talks about praying to God. Our best counselor is God. That's how I deal with this. When I know that there is someone who is watching me at all times and knows every moment and every feeling and every emotion that I'm going through, and he understands it because he has seen the worst of the worst with his people and what they go through, can I fall down on my knees and just pour out my emotion to him? Because he knows what I'm going through. He knows what every one of those people in paradise are going through. He knows, those of us in here this morning. There are some of you who are suffering right now for different things, different situations, and God sees you. But when we have these afflictions, we need to realize it defines us. James goes on, verse 3 in chapter 1, he says, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience or steadfast. Trials can result in becoming more faithful or to cause the weak-hearted to just quit. We have a choice. We're going to go one of two ways when we're faced with these. What do we do when we feel helpless and hopeless and worried that we are not going to make it? And then I'm reminded about Moses and the Israelites following. When God told Moses to confront Pharaoh in Exodus chapter 3, in verse 12, you notice what he says? How amazing this was. This is Moses, whom God tells, I want you to go in and tell the most powerful man on earth that you want him to let your people go, my people. Moses gets scared. Why wouldn't he? He's going and facing a man that has absolutely no remorse. Children are expendable to him. In his line, you think of just what had happened with these small children, and just for no other reason except for fear. He would just, for the throne, that he would throw these children into the river and just end their life. And and he says, you want me to go in and talk to him, who can have me destroyed. Now, he had a relationship with him, but he says he's going to, he could have destroyed me with one order, and he wouldn't have even thought twice about it. But you notice what God said? He said, I will certainly be with you. You see, God was not sending him back in alone. There is not anything that we have in our lives, nothing that we're going through right now in which God is not going to be with us through every step of the way. He's not going to stop it necessarily. Sometimes providentially we are able to see that work, but there is never going to be a time that he is not going to see us and understand us in a way so much more than any of our friends or even our own families are going to understand. God sees me. Affliction sharpens us, and it lends us clarity. The result of being steadfast is that we're going to be complete, lacking in nothing, James says. That's how I'm going to get through it, knowing what he's going to be. It's being free from worries, having that Joshua moment when you face your Jericho and can be strong and of good courage and not be dismayed. Why? Because God sees you. I have preached more funerals over the last few years with people who have passed away from cancer than I ever hope I ever have to do. It's something, I've been preaching for a little over 10 years now, and I know it's not nearly as long as a lot of people in this room, there's preachers, but I'll tell you what, when you start preaching funerals of close friends, elders, there was an elder when we lived in Florida who was like a second father to Micah, passed away of cancer. Had to preach his funeral. My son Micah, and now he's 8 years old, spoke at the funeral. If you don't think there was not a dry eye in that place. I hate cancer. But I started wondering, as much as I don't like it, and as much as obviously family members who've never had it don't like it because it does affect us, what is it like when someone gets that news, do you think? When they have, they go in for those tests, and the difficult news that they receive when that doctor comes to them and they say, you have cancer. And this is what's going to happen. We've been praying for Tabby Jenkins this week. And I'm so grateful. So I know she's certainly appreciative of so many people, and I'm glad Tyler is able to be here. But I remember I was talking to Tabby not too long ago, and we were corresponding back and forth online. And I asked her that question: what was it like? Can you describe it? What that point was like when you were first told? I'm thinking a different answer, because I'm thinking the answer I would probably give if I was given that news. But I want to read you her response. I asked her, how did you respond when you were told? Here's what she wrote back to me. She said, I wasn't surprised, but I didn't fully take it in. I didn't know what was ahead, so I wasn't scared. Once the doctor left, I looked at Tyler and he winked and smiled. That moment, I knew this was an honor and a privilege to endure this trial. When I had time to think more about it, I realized it could mean death. That didn't scare me, because I knew I'd be in paradise. And then the hard part of calling my family, who all live 17 hours from us, that I have cancer. It's like a dagger to my chest. I'd never heard my grandma's voice so sad in my life. But every other second I thought about God. He will keep his promises. And that gave me peace. People tell cancer patients to fight and keep fighting. You're so strong. But we, cancer patients, know that truthfully, we cannot fight. We do the chemo and the procedures, and we do what we must to keep living. And so I realized the day I had my very first chemo that I can't fight. I could do nothing but pray. Sickness and pain constant. I had nothing left. And so I endured. But it was our God that fought, as he heard every prayer on my behalf. He was the warrior. And he always wins. We face trials to justify us for eternal life. And they will test our faith. I couldn't say it any better than that. Friends, you think of the most difficult moments in your life. Trials aren't easy. It's why they're trials. That's, we go through them. There's a reason. And we're going to worry, and we're going to stress, and we're going to ask, why me? What did I ever do? I attend worship weekly, and I try to reach people, and I do so much good, and I try to be the father to my family that is expected of me. I try to be the good husband. I try to be the good friend. And there are things, though, that are going to happen to us, and we're going to question God, and we're going to get mad, and we're going to get angry at different things, and ask, how can I count it joy? But when you realize that God is there, that's when we can finally get to that place. And there can be a place where we will not worry. We'll reach that breaking point. We're going to want to scream out. But it is in that moment where we can echo the words of Peter. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. Stop trying to cope with it yourself. Stop worrying about it yourself. That he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. We go back to our text in Matthew chapter 6. And again, looking at verse 25, therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? And look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And you think of everything that we go through and everything that can cause worry, and we're probably justified for that worry sometimes, but he says, your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more of value than they are? God is saying, I have taken care of you this long, and I'm not going to stop. There is purity in not worrying, because you can trust in him who will not leave you. Thank you.